Tell us a little bit about gypsy jazz guitars, because they're very different, aren't they?
Yes, well, this is an example of one, and this has got the large sound hole, the D hole, it's called, or the le grande bouche, the big mouth. They are a longer scale than normal guitars, a little bit longer. They have a very light soundboard here, which vibrates very easily. The bridge, as you can see, is attached via the strings, so it's just sitting loosely on here. Strings are holding it in place, tailpiece, and it's got that really nice sound, you know, which is lovely, I think, anyway.
Now, there's a difference, isn't there, in picking techniques when it comes to rock and roll and gypsy jazz, which would have been very different for you because you were an up picker in your early days, weren't you?
Yeah, I did a lot of up picking. That's picking from this direction that way. Not all the time, of course, but particularly on ballads, I found I could get a lot of sensitivity and just caress the strings if I was just picking it, rather than, you know. But now I'm learning to and also get it with downstrokes, which is helpful. Gypsies play in a particular style. They do a lot of downstroking. They do what we would call sweep picking, you know, when they're doing coming across with one picking motion. And they tend to come back across the strings, and rule of thumb, every time you change a string, a downstroke. Very difficult for most of us who haven't grown up in that style. And there are so many different ways of picking guitar strings that it doesn't, at the end of the day, probably doesn't matter too much as long as you produce some good music. I do, though, play more downstrokes than I used to. But one thing about downstroking is, particularly with an acoustic instrument, you get a much more authoritative sound out of the instrument, and that's, I think, why they have that style. It gives strength to the note, a lot of authority. But I know a lot of guys who play in the gypsy style who've come from a more conventional background, maybe rock and roll guitar, jazz fusion, whatever, and they probably play more or less as they did before, with a bit more strength on the picking hand because it is an acoustic, but certainly they don't play absolutely in the gypsy style.